Hey guys, welcome to the channel. So if you're like me, you're always on the quest for that next gluten-free pizza dough recipe that you're gonna love. You want it to taste normal, like regular pizza that everyone else has, and you want it to be easy. So if you've watched a couple of my other videos recently, I've been using this King Arthur gluten-free pizza flour, trying it out, seeing if the blend works really well. We did some ciabatta rolls with it. I did a deep dish pizza. Now it's time to just do a regular Neapolitan style pizza, which is just a thin crust pizza. So the flour promises an airy, crisp, and chewy crust. So let's find out. I'm Jamie with SavorySaver. I share gluten-free recipes, tips, tricks, and resources to make your gluten-free lifestyle easier. So please consider hitting subscribe, and let's get started. So real quick guys, if you've not seen my other couple videos using this gluten-free pizza flour by King Arthur Baking, the main ingredient is wheat starch, and it has been processed to meet the FDA guidelines for a gluten-free product. By all means, I know some of my celiac viewers won't touch this. Totally get it. Play it safe where you need to, because we don't want you guys hurting because, you know, you have a reaction. I have done the other two videos. They are worth checking out if you want to check out other videos for this product. The other thing with today's recipe is I'm only baking half of it. So the recipe on the back of the package here actually makes two 10-inch crusts, but we don't need two crusts this time, so I'm gonna have it. And I also am doing it by weight because it divides up more easily by weight than it does by volume. So full directions will be linked below in the description, as well as all the ingredients for this. Not many ingredients, guys. It's a basic pizza crust, just using their flour. Let's get started. Okay, so for the recipe, I will read you the full amount of the ingredient, but remember, I'm only using half in my recipe. So you'll need 2 1/3 cup of the gluten-free pizza flour, or 233 grams. You're gonna add 2 teaspoons of instant yeast. I'm going to give it a stir. I am doing this by hand today. I usually do the mixer on the past 2 recipes using this flour, but because I'm having it, I've got the wooden spoon out. So we're gonna see how this does hand mixing. It says you can do both. Let's also add our sugar. I have got a tablespoon of sugar going in. I just like to mix this stuff in first just to disperse the yeast before I add the salt. In goes our salt. It's 3/4 of a teaspoon. You're gonna need 1 1/4 cups of warm water. It's about 120 degrees, guys. You're also gonna need some olive oil, a tablespoon. We want to mix everything until it's smooth and it's going to be sticky. So with the pizza dough recipe, I actually make the most. I use a different flour called Caputo, and I usually mix it for a minute or 2, and that's usually all I need to do. So I'm gonna assume that this one works the same way, because we're gonna let this rest and that'll give everything time to hydrate. All right, so that looks pretty smooth to me. It's also gotten pretty hard to stir by hand. I'm sure all those starches have absorbed the water, so they're starting to tighten up. So let's scrape everything back into the bowl. We want it in one piece. Okay, everything's down in the bowl, all one mass now. So we need to let it rise. So I'm gonna cover it with a towel. And normally I would rise this in my oven just at a very low temperature and then turn it off and just let it sit in that oven that's a little warmer than the air in the room. But my oven's being used for another recipe for you guys. So I'm gonna put it on the counter next to the oven. I'm gonna let it rise for an hour at room temperature, and then I'm actually gonna move it to the refrigerator for 30 minutes. So once it's to the fridge for 30 minutes, that's when I'm gonna start preheating my oven. When I preheat the oven, I'm gonna put my pizza stone in the bottom of it. These give really good crust results. They're not super expensive, so if you need one, I will link them below. If you have one and you don't use it, Get it out. It really helps with the gluten-free crust to give you better crispness, to better chewiness. These hold a lot of heat, guys. I highly recommend one of these. When I put this in the oven, I'm gonna put it on the bottom rack and I'm gonna turn the oven on to 500 degrees. That's super high. We want a nice crust. So let's let the dough rest and we'll come back and cook it off. Okay, so our dough rose on the counter for about an hour, and I will say it did really well as far as growing in size. I was really surprised by that. Then we chilled it for 30 minutes, which I'm not familiar with gluten-free type, baking things. But we chilled it for 30 minutes after the rise, and now we're gonna see what it looks like. I did not look at it, even though it's a clear bowl under here, to see what it did, if it did anything else. Okay, so it looks pretty good. It's a nice looking dough, and it's not super sticky, but I think it's gonna be because it says to spread it out with wet hands or lightly oiled hands. So let's put this onto the parchment paper. I am using a pizza screen. I have shown this on the channel before. I like using this for transferring it to the pizza stone because I can slide this onto the stone. The pizza and the parchment paper will slide right onto the stone. And then once the pizza's done, I can get some tongs and slide it right onto this. This is a little lighter than a pizza pan. It doesn't have a lip really, so it makes it easy transferring back and forth. All right, so let's get this on the paper. And then I've got oil here, but I'm gonna start with wetting my hands only because it's a little easier to clean wet hands as opposed to oil hands. All right, so first up, look how clean that bowl is. We had very little sticking. It went right out onto this bowl. This isn't a bowl. This is parchment paper, FYI. I'm having a hard talking day, evidently. So now we need to spread it out. Obviously, if you did the full recipe, you would have 2 balls about this size. Let's wet my hands. Got the measuring tape out for 10 inches just to give me an idea of what I need to do. So let's start spreading it. You want a thicker outer rim than the middle. Okay, so let's talk about this. My favorite pizza dough recipe that I've had so far is with Caputo, which is also on the channel, so check that out. It's another wheat starch based gluten-free flour, but I will say this actually is handling a little bit easier. Not sure if it's the chilling that did it or if it's just the blend of ingredients, because it is sticky, but it's actually a little more workable. So I'm really liking this. It is starting to stick more. Let's wet my hands one more time, and if I feel like I'm not getting good spread, then I will switch over to some oil. All right, wet fingertips again. So far, this is working really well. This is my 3rd recipe with this flour, and I'm really liking it. I feel like it's pretty easy to work with so far. I've not really had any complaints on it. Okay, 3rd time of wetting my hands. Every time you start finding yourself sticking to the dough, wet your fingers again. I do want to also note a few tips right from the back of the bag. Of course, the full recipes are listed on their website. This does say you can make the dough ahead of time, so you can make it like 24 hours in advance, which is nice. For the full recipe, you would just reduce the yeast to just 1/8 of a teaspoon, down from 2 teaspoons, and that's because of the longer rise. It doesn't need as much yeast. The 2-pound bag makes approximately 7 10-inch pizzas. So you're gonna get about 7 of these, and that's a really good deal for gluten-free pizza crust if you make pizza a lot, because I paid around $13 for this bag of flour, and then the other ingredients are pretty simple, standard, keep them in the house all the time. So you're getting some cost effectiveness there, even though you're only getting 2 pounds for $13 or whatever it happens to be, if you guys look it up. It also says that if you were making your own recipe, that you have a favorite recipe you use, that it says if it's a conventional recipe with gluten, you keep the same amount of flour, but you increase the water amount by 50%, meaning, you know, if it called for a cup of water, you would do a cup and a half of water to that recipe. All right, guys, I'm a little shy of the 10 inches, I think. Let's see. Yeah, I'm still about just over 9. I'm not gonna worry about it though. I think we'll be fine. I do have a little bit of an edge. One thing you could do is if you really want to be at the 10 inches and know where you need to be, find like a 10-inch plate, trace it, flip over that parchment paper, and then you have your guide right on the parchment paper. You just don't want to put it on the side you're writing on. So let's get this topped. Real basic pizza toppings for this one. Use your favorite toppings. Let's do some sauce. Next, we like a little bit of Parmesan cheese on our pizza. The powdered stuff works great for this. So I just kind of do a light coating across the top. Some Italian seasoning. A little bit of garlic powder. This is actually roasted garlic powder, so I'm going to put a little of that on. Now we need cheese, of course. Finally, we need to add some pepperoni, or I need to add some pepperoni. You may want sausage. All right, pepperoni, done. And I do like a little more cheese because I kind of think it holds down some of that pepperoni. Pizza crust, done, ready to go in the oven. The oven's set at 500. It's gonna bake for 15 to 18 minutes. Our crust should end up golden and our cheese should end up bubbly. I'm gonna show you guys how easy this slides off onto the pizza stone, along with this, leaving me this behind to take it back out when it's done. I want you guys to pay attention to where I have my pizza rack and stone. It is at the very bottom of my oven. I don't think I've ever cooked anything at the bottom of the oven like it is now. It's the lowest rack position possible. So let's get this in the oven so we can cool it for about 5 minutes when it comes out and give it a taste. Look at this gluten-free pizza. It looks great. Cheese is all bubbly and cooked. Crust super golden. I'm gonna try to lift it up and not burn my fingers because it just came out of the oven. Let's see if you guys can see the bottom. Not a great shot of the goldenness, but it's definitely cooked well. This only took about 13 minutes of the 15 to 18 that the recipe said. So my oven must have been at a great temperature for this. I'm gonna let this cool for just a couple minutes, get a couple photos for you guys, and then we're gonna give it a taste. Our gluten-free Neapolitan style pizza from King Arthur Baking's relatively new flour, their gluten-free pizza flour, done, out of the oven, 5 minute to rest. I've cut into it. It's a pretty small slice, but it's a 10-inch pizza. So it's actually 1/8 of the pizza. I've already had lunch, so I don't need all of this now if I can help it. Let's go over the recipe just briefly. Super easy to work with. I really liked the directions on the bag. They were easy to follow. It didn't take a lot of time to put together. It wasn't a whole lot of active time. Most of it was it resting to rise and then in the fridge. Really not a lot of effort other than you're gonna need to plan ahead, of course, to make sure it's ready when you wanna eat dinner or lunch or whatever. Bake. It did puff up quite a bit, and remember, I made it like a 9-inch pizza. So I wasn't at full size like they said. A thinner crust would probably give you less rise, of course. Not worried about that. I like the puffiness of the crust. It is kind of crisp. It does look airy inside, so we've got those two things covered. It also said chewy crust, which I think we're gonna get just by the texture. Let's give it a taste. Crust is light, it is chewy, and it does have a little bit of crispness to it when I bite down onto it. Really good crust. I'd have to say, making it once, it's probably a tie with my other favorite crust, the Caputo brand crust that I make. But this might be my new go-to pretty soon if I keep using it. This flour is actually a little bit easier to get than the Caputo. It's gonna be available more places because it is King Arthur and not an import flour like the other one is. Let me take another bite of that. Yes, that is definitely a crust worth trying if you like the King Arthur brand and if you're okay with using a wheat starch-based gluten-free flour. Guys, I want to thank you so much for watching. Please leave any comments below on this, whether you'd try it with the wheat starch flour. I know some of you will not, some of you might. Leave me comments below on what you think cost-wise. Right now it's about $13 a bag. That may be too much for you guys. What are your ideas there? What would you do instead? Love hearing from you guys. Thank you for all the comments and for watching again. I hope to see you on the next video.